Hello, my lovelies. I'm in my library today. Yeah, doing some recording at school during my lunch block. The wild robot escapes. Where are we? We're on chapter 18, The Cabin. Ooh, they're in safe from the storm, hopefully. The hailstorm was brief but violent. The icy stones were quickly melting away, but the damage would linger on. The valley was littered with shredded leaves and wildflowers. Wounded animals were hobbling back to their homes. Several unlucky birds lay limp in the grass. Inside the cabin, Roz was standing by the window. She held Bright Bill in her arms, his bruised body wrapped in an old blanket. The robot knew everything there was to know about caring for animals. But all her son needed was time. His injuries would heal on their own. Go on without me, Ma, said the goose in a weak voice. I'll catch up to you when I'm feeling better. That is ridiculous, said the robot. What kind of mother would leave her injured son behind? But, Ma, stop talking, interrupted Roz. You need to rest. Bright Bill tried to argue, but he was already falling asleep. The cabin was simple, just a square room with a wood stove, two chairs beside a table, and a couple of cots rotting in the corner. Dusty mugs and bowls sat on a shelf. Otherwise, the walls were bare. It was clear no humans had been there for a very long time. However, it seemed that some other creature had moved in. The whole place had a foul odor. Lumps of feces were strewn about, and little footprints trailed away from the dark hole in the floor. Roz leaned over the hole, and in the language of animals, she said, Hello, is anyone down there? Something moved, and then a pair of shining eyes looked up from the darkness. Who are you? Said a voice. I didn't invite you into my home. I'm sorry to intrude, said the robot. My son and I were only trying to escape the hailstorm. Your son? Is that him in your arms? Let me see. Very gently, the robot lifted a fold of cloth and revealed the sleeping goose. He must take after his father, said the voice. He is my adopted son, the robot explained. My name is Roz, and this is Bright Bill. The shining eyes blinked, and the voice squeaked with excitement. You're Roz and Bright Bill. The birds have been singing about you for months. You are living legends. Technically, I am not living, said the robot. You seem pretty alive to me, said the voice. Either way, it's nice to meet you. They call me Sprinkles. With that, the creature crawled up through the hole in the floor. She was covered in black fur from her nose all the way to the tip of her fluffy tail. Well, except for the white stripes running down her back. You see, Sprinkles was a skunk. The robot took one look at her and stepped backward. Sprinkles frowned. You know, Roz, skunks only get stinky when we're nervous. Are you nervous now? Well, sort of, but in a good way. I'm honored to meet you. Please pull up a seat and tell me what brings you here. Sprinkles hopped onto the table and listened as Roz described their journey. The skunk was a very good listener. While Roz spoke, Sprinkles nodded politely and said things like, Oh my, and is that right? And you don't say. This went on until Bright Bill began to stir. Ma, I'm thirsty, he whispered. There's a creek right out back, said Sprinkles, and those might be useful. She motioned to the bowls on the shelf. Please help yourself to anything. My home is your home. It turns out skunks can be quite hospitable. Sprinkles invited the visitors to stay as long as they liked, and so our friends spent Bright Bill's recovery in the cabin. The goose mostly slept. The robot brought him water and food. The skunk made sure both were comfortable. A few mornings later, sunlight streamed in through the windows and onto Bright Bill. He was squawking and waddling and fluttering around the cabin. His injuries had healed, and he was eager to continue their journey. Thank you for everything, Sprinkles, the robot waved as she marched away from the cabin with her son on her shoulder. Glad I could help, called the skunk. Misunderstood creatures like us gotta look out for each other. Chapter 59, The Strange Wilderness. Another gloomy day had settled over the mountains. Here and there, the sun broke through the clouds, and bright streaks came shining down like spotlights. One of those bright streaks swept over a rugged mountainside and found our friends. For a moment, the robot and Goose basked in warm sunlight. Then the patch of light moved on and rolled over the next valley, where it sparkled across a strange industrial site. Well, that means like factories and such. Look at how tall the stilts are. A patchwork of large boxy structures was nestled among the trees. Broken walkways clung to the walls. Ramps and pipes slanted up from holes in the ground. The robot's computer brain identified the site. It was a deserted coal mine. This was a strange kind of wilderness. Scattered throughout that mountain range were ghosts of human activities. Overgrown railroads, rusted automobiles, spindly towers perched on mountain tops, faded signs with messages like no trespassing and no hunting. It seemed humans had lived and worked in this wilderness only to leave it all behind. In places, though, there was still activity, robot activity. Armies of robot workers methodically dug new tunnels and built new dams and worked in new mining operations. They took down abandoned buildings and hauled away truckloads of litter. Our friends were curious about these working robots, but they kept a safe distance and went on their way. Chapter 60 is called The Hunters. Crack! A gunshot echoed through the mountains. There weren't many hunters willing to trek into that wilderness, but those who did were serious. They camped out, wore camouflage, and fired traditional rifles for the sport of it. Crack! Roz and Brightbill were desperate to stay clear of the hunters. However, that was proving difficult. The trees were tightly packed together, and the undergrowth was tough and tangled. So they followed the deer paths that cut through the part of the forest. But they never knew when or where the next shot would be fired. Crack! The gunshots were growing louder. Our friends slowed to a crawl, afraid of being seen or heard. And then the chatter of forest animals fell silent. Crack! A bullet whizzed through the undergrowth and a deer went bounding away. At the same time, birds screeched and flapped in the air. Unfortunately, one of those birds was Brightbill. Scared and confused, the young goose fluttered up to a tree limb just as two hunters emerged from the bushes. "What's a goose doing alone in these mountains?" said Hank, staring up at Brightbill. "And what's it doing in a tree?" "There must be something wrong with it," said Miguel. "Maybe you should put it out of its misery." Hank reloaded his rifle. "We're here to hunt deer," he said, "but it looks like we're having goose for dinner." Had the hunters known Brightbill the way we do, reader, they surely would have left him alone, but they knew nothing about him. To them, Brightbill was just another goose, a meal, and they were hungry. The hunter raised his rifle. He took a deep breath. His finger reached for the trigger, and then a gust of fierce wind suddenly blew across the forest floor. No, not wind, footsteps. Something was stomping toward the hunters. Their rifles were ripped away, bent into hooks, and thrown aside. The men had hunted all manner of beasts, but they'd never come across this. Well, they didn't know what the thing was. It looked like a tree stump standing on two long roots with branches hanging from its side. The men stumbled backwards, eyes and mouths opened wide. Then they turned and ran, and their terrified noises trailed off through the leaf litter. The goose was terrified too. He slumped off his branch and into his mother's arms. The poor bird was trembling with fear, but he was unharmed. "I'm so sorry, Brightbill," said the robot. "I should have acted sooner. You are safe now, I promise." She's camouflaged so they can't tell that she's a robot. Chapter 61 is called The Guide. A light drizzle was falling on the travelers, although they weren't actually traveling at the moment. They were standing still and staring up at a steep mountain of rocks. The robot had plenty of rock climbing experience, but one bad fall out there and she could be stranded forever. So Roz carefully picked her way up the slippery slope, while Brightbill fluttered along beside her. They hadn't gone long when there came the sound of hooves clattering on stone, and then came a horned creature leaping from the mist and smashed right into the robot. Clang! Roz went flying backward. Clang! Roz crashed to the ground. Standing on the rocks above the robot was a wild ram. He had big curling horns and a... Well, my lovelies, you're not going to believe this, but we had technical difficulties. My school computer stopped recording after 10 minutes. Luckily, I heard it right away stop. And we're going to figure out if I can put these two video clips together, because I am not an editor. I am a performer. But I will try my best for you. All right. So the ram just hit them. Hit the robot. Let's keep going. Brightbill flew to his mother's side, ready to defend her. "Stay away from my mama," he hissed, spreading his wings. But rather than charging, the ram hung his head and started to cry. "Oh, I'm so sorry," he blubbered. "I don't want to hurt anyone. Sometimes I just lose control and smash things. I feel awful about it, really, I do." Roz brushed herself off. "I believe those are your instincts," she said. "We all have them. They can be very powerful. I only hope your instincts do not end up breaking me." "Don't worry," the ram sniffled. "I'll try not to let my instincts break you." "I appreciate that," said the robot. My name's Thud," said the ram. "Which way are you headed?" "We are trying to find our way out of these mountains," said Roz, "but they never seem to end." "You're almost there," said Thud. "Let me show you the way. It's the least I can do after smashing you." The ram pranced away and led our friends to a narrow path that wound up the rocky mountainside. Roz tried to stay close, but Thud was born to climb. He easily scrambled up the steep slopes and vanished into the mist. A minute later, his friendly voice called out, "For a creature without hooves, you're not a bad climber." And there he was, peering down from the cliff ledge. The path opened into a foggy meadow where a whole flock of wild sheep were grazing. They reminded Roz of the cows grazing in the pasture, and she wondered how Hilltop Farm was doing without her. The Thud pranced through the flock. These are my new friends," he announced without stopping. "They're lost, so I'm guiding them out of the mountains." The sheep raised their heads. Thud had a habit of making weird friends, but these two were definitely the weirdest. The flock watched as the ram, the robot, and the goose continued up the mountain and disappeared into the mist. Higher and higher they climbed above the tree line to where there were only rocks and scrubby plants trickling mountain streams. They occasionally came upon a dirt road or a hiking trail, and the ram trotted casually across while our friends crept across cautiously. At one point, the ram got a crazed look in his eye again. His horns came flying at the robot, and she jumped out of the way just in time. Then Thud cried and apologized for his instincts. Roz forgave him, and the group carried on. They finally hiked up from the mist and onto a mountain ridge. Above, the sky was clear. Below, a blanket of puffy clouds spread outward in every direction. The sun was setting, and the western clouds were burning pink. Roz thought of the mountaintop on her island. If only she could be watching the sunset from the peak instead of this one. But they still had a long, long way to go. So at the top of the mountain. They pointed their friends to one last path. "This will take you down from the mountains and through the foothills," he said, smiling. The ram suddenly got that crazed look in his eyes again, and the robot prepared to jump. But this time, Thud pulled himself together. He said goodbye to the travelers, and then he pranced away. All right, here's what we're going to do. Because this is only a 4.5-minute clip. Graham is going to try and put them together into one video clip. Wish me luck. Okay, let me give kisses. You didn't get them in the last video, unless it's hooked to this one. Fingers crossed. I love you.